So in Unit 2, Module 3, we're going to go a little bit deeper into a couple of things we talked about in the previous unit in the context of discovery workshops. Firstly, identifying risks and creating a risk log. And second, identifying key assumptions and designing experiments to test them. So, in the context of building products, Marty Kagan, the author of Inspired, says there are 4 key risks. Number 1, value risk. Will our customers buy our product or will users choose to use it? Number 2, usability risk, whether users can figure out how to use it. Number 3, feasibility risk, whether our engineers can build what we need with the time, skills and technology we have. And 4, business viability risk, whether the solution also works with the rest of our business. So in product management, you're looking for 4 characteristics to build a great product. 1, that it's valuable. 2, that it's usable. 3, that it's feasible. And 4, that it's viable. And so with each of those characteristics is an associated risk. And these risks are very high level risks. There's a whole another level of risks below that when you take these and break them out. So this is a very high level picture of the kind of thing that you're thinking about as a product manager. And from your risk activity last week, you'll see that some of these risks you can categorize under these high level categories. So when we're thinking about these risks, what we generally do to try and discover if these risks are real or if we're going to be able to build a good product is user research. User research is really at the heart of what we do as a product manager to gather data to test these risks. And there's this nice diagram by Janice Fraser which describes user research in terms of a quadrant diagram. And we have 2 axes here. The first axis is whether the user research is evaluative or generative. And if you remember from Unit 2, Module 2, we talked about design thinking and we talked about generative activities where we come up with ideas and evaluative activities where we decide which of those ideas are good. So that's true of user research. There's generative user research and then there's evaluative user research. And then there's also a division that's whether the user research is qualitative or quantitative. So based on these categories, we can take all the different kinds of user research and classify them. A lot of what we'll do in the early stages of product development is surveys, going and talking to potential users or customers and doing surveys. That is quantitative, but there's also qualitative methods that are generative. Things like contextual inquiry, which comes from anthropology, ride-alongs where you go and actually ride with your users and watch them solve the problems that you're hoping to help them solve with your products. And then there's evaluative forms of user research, qualitative types such as usability testing or concept testing, and then quantitative forms of evaluative user research such as A/B testing and analytics, where we actually instrument our software systems and find out what works and what doesn't. So if you want to go into a bit more depth on these kinds of user research, there's a nice website from 18F, which is an agency within the US federal government, which is a consultancy that helps federal government agencies apply lean and agile methods to product development. And there's a whole series of cards where they talk about the different kinds of methods you can use in discovery. So that's a very good free resource which introduces a number of different user research activities that you can apply. There's also this book that just came out this year in 2020, Testing Business Ideas, that I referred to earlier. And that's got a whole bunch of experiments that you can run and forms of user research that you can do. So there's a whole bunch of user research you can do without having to build anything. But at some point, you're going to have to build some kind of prototype or run some kind of experiment. And this is where the build, measure, learn loop that we talked about in Module 1 comes in. And the idea is we'll have an idea and we'll build some kind of prototype and then measure how users respond to that and gather data in order to learn more in terms of our assumptions or our key risks or our product in general. And it's in this context that Eric Ries uses this term minimum viable product. And you hear this term everywhere. And the unfortunate problem with it is that different people mean different things. So I'm just going to present two common meanings of it. And I actually don't think it's a good idea to use the term MVP at all because it's so easy to misinterpret. But if you're going to use it, you should know that there's at least two common definitions and that they do not mean the same thing. So the first definition used by Eric Ries is that version of a product that enables a full turn of the build, measure, learn loop with a minimal amount of effort and the least amount of development time. Now, Eric Ries does not actually mean building a real product in this context. One of the examples that he gives very frequently is a website that he worked on called InView, which was a 3D virtual world. And he talks about spending 6 months building the first version of this product and how when he released it, he was really worried about whether it would go wrong. And what happened is no one downloaded it. And he said, I could have gathered that information by simply building a static HTML page with a download link that took you to a 404 page and noticing that nobody got the 404 page. That would have given me the same amount of information as building the prototype. So this is the context in which he introduces the MVP. Marty Kagan says an MVP should never be an actual product, where product is defined as something that your developers can release with confidence, that your customers can run their business on, and that you can sell and support. The MVP should be a prototype, not a product. So this is the first version of MVP, which some people refer to as an MVP test. It's the smallest amount of work you need to do to build something, not something you would actually sell to customers necessarily, but something which would allow you to gather data to actually test a key assumption or risk of your product. There is also another use of the term MVP. So Jeff Patton talks about MVP as the smallest product release that successfully achieves its desired outcomes. So in this context, you are actually selling it, and it's a release that delivers some value to some set of users. In that context, there's this useful illustration that helps people understand what an MVP is. And crucially, it's not some part of your final product that's not useful in its own right. So it's not we're going to build one wheel and then we're going to do two wheels and then we're going to build the chassis and then we're going to build the car, because no one can use just one wheel or just the chassis. So Herrick Knieberg, who invented this, says, well, listen, it's not about building one part that no one can use. You're going to build, first of all, a skateboard and then a scooter and then a bike and then a motorbike and then a car, because each of those iterations is actually useful. Now, this is not a perfect analogy because the market for a skateboard is very different from the market for a car. What this is actually supposed to convey is that you're first of all going to target some very small slice of your target market and solve a particular problem that they have, and then broaden out to a wider and wider part of the market segment that you're targeting. That's really what's going on with an MVP in the sense of something you would actually sell. And this idea goes back to the roots of agile and lean development, and this is the idea of incremental and iterative development. And this idea is, we're not building increments where we build just one piece at a time perfectly. Instead, what we're doing is we're being iterative. We're building a sketch and then we're making the sketch better and better until we have the final product. So that's a brief introduction to MVPs in the context of building things to run experiments, which we do in order to explore the risks that we identify as part of our discovery process.